I'll come back to you, Dr. Singhvi. Amitabh Mukhopadhyay next, former Director General CAG.
How is it armed to
Amitabh,
a couple of things need to be clarified. I think our parliamentarians
next.
should
let them come to Parliament. Parliament is
I think parliamentarians need to accept the fact that CAG is not a cadre
all these
post.
organizations.
1 minute.
Functional
The
independence.
CAG is not
And
governed
therefore, if a
by the
Lokpal
Ministry
happens,
of
this
Finance.
will all be under the Lokpal. What is the problem with it?
Okay, Amitabh Mukhopadhyay is also taking on Abhishek Manu Singhvi in this debate. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Sir, I'd like to point out to you that CAG is not a cadre post, it's a constitutional post. And that makes a lot of difference to the kind of restraint and circumspection which he applies on himself to speak in the public domain. Number two, the officers of the CAG, that is the Indian Audit and Accounts Service, are governed by Article 148(5), which says that their conditions of service will be governed after consultation by the President of India, after consultation with CAG. So please distinguish between a constitutional authority and a cadre authority. The second point I want to make is that CAG said something about brazenness only in the context of a situation prevailing up till the RTI Act came in.
Yes.
If you check up on the text of the matter, he said that after RTI, everyone is being forced to become a little more accountable, and that RTI has made a big difference to public administration in India. Now, the point is that whenever he makes a suggestion about CVC or CBI, there are persons like Digvijay Singh who talk about why CAG is leaking reports.
Yeah.
Now, here also, it has to be, I must put it on record, that CAG has written to the Prime Minister expressing his absolute dismay over the fact that reports leak and that these should be investigated by the investigating agencies. He has met the Speaker, and in the presence of 3 ministers, he had sought a clarification on whether this constitutes a breach of privilege. He has been told that giving inspection reports under RTI to applicants is not a breach of privilege. He has even pleaded before the CIC that this should not, the inspection report should not be open to the public, and CIC has ruled against that. So Digvijay Singh needs to check up on the facts.
So why is the government threatened by the CAG is the question. Abhishek Singhvi, I'll come to you and give you full time. Is the government threatened by the institution of the CAG? TSR Subramaniam is now responding to the initial observations of Dr. Singhvi. Yes. Yes, TSR Subramaniam, and sorry to come to you last, sir.
Arnab, 3 points. The first point is the attempt to attack the messenger is frivolous and laughable. I don't think we should spend any time over it. It is too frivolous to discuss. On the second point of the 2 parts of the statement, I entirely agree with him that there's enough evidence, as has been discussed in recent times, of brazenness and appalling character of the decision making. I don't think anybody in India would question that. I think Vinod Rai's point is more general, not just the recent scams in Delhi, but also the way decisions are taken in state government.
No, Dr. Singhvi says that these are subjective words. They breach discipline. I'll tell you Dr. Singhvi's points. One, he says subjective words, breach discipline. A serving officer can write his memoirs, but he says Vinod Rai cannot sit there at the World Economic Forum and say something like that. I want you to respond to Dr. Singhvi on that.
Please don't disturb me. I didn't disturb you. I didn't disturb you. Please don't disturb me. I entirely agree with what he said. Most of the country will agree with what he has said. There is a question of propriety in his saying, which is only a minor caveat. It does not detract from the gravity of the charge, which is absolutely valid. To some extent, I will agree. He could have been more circumspect, but I don't think it is condemnation of the CAG. I fully agree. On the second part, I agree entirely with the sentiment of what he said. The CBI is a handmaiden, particularly in all sensitive matters. We have now seen for the last 60 years this pattern. Therefore, they must be made independent. whether constitutional, whether or not constitutional is okay if it is possible, but independence is the key word with appropriate supervision. I think the Vinod Rai has done tremendous service to the country today. We should take heed of what he is saying. He has spoken
which brings me back to Dr. Singhvi.
And if we want to go forward, we've got to take it as gospel and proceed.
Which takes me back to Dr. Singhvi. Which takes me back to Dr. Singhvi. Dr. Singhvi, you said you have severe problems with his description of governance having recently become brazen. Decisions becoming brazen to the extent of being appalling.
Arnab.
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
I think you're doing me a great disservice. You've got three persons out there with one view, and you're giving me less than one-third the time. You have made several completely wrong statements, attributing them to me and not giving me time to reply. Journalistic or rhetorical flourish cannot take the place of constitutional fact. I have never said and never approached this program by suggesting even remotely that Vinod Rai should be punished under the civil service rules for speaking. I don't know where you've got that
I didn't say that.
I've never
I didn't say that.
Discipline.
No, I quoted you from Parliament,
Allow
sir.
me to complete. Now, Arnab, it can't be, I'm on an OB, you're an anchor, you've got three people there, and before I take two sentences, you interrupt me. Let me say my wrong things. Hear me out at least. Secondly, you have repeatedly suggested, as if I am suggesting, and Mr. Mukhopadhyay thought that I am suggesting, that Mr. Vinod Rai is part of a civil service cadre. At least give me credit for more intelligence than that. Fact one, the short debate as it started off, and I made it clear at the beginning of the debate, was that we were discussing whether a sitting CAG, is it apposite, proper, only propriety, not a crime, not civil service rules, not penalty, not discipline. Is it proper for him to make comments about governance in general using such strong adjectives? My view is it is not. It is not, because each constitutional functionary functions and should function with a Lakshman Rekha. It is only a matter of propriety. If other constitutional functionaries every day started speaking like this, you'd have chaos in the country. That's all that we reached.
So what has he said wrong? No, but what has he said wrong?
Also, let me make it clear. 1 minute. Let me make it clear. One sec. No, I didn't say wrong. It's a matter. Well, the only issue is, he said at a public forum,
yes,
as a sitting CAG, that there is brazenness and he's appalled.
Yes.
Now, if there is, we don't know exactly, but it suggests clearly a sweeping indictment of governance. Now, that certainly, I'm going further. It may be true as far as my view is concerned, or your view as a journalist is concerned. It may be true as far as Mr. Subramaniam's, Mr. T.S.R. Subramaniam's view is concerned. Question is, as a sitting constitutional authority, should you be saying that? Is the question. I don't think it's proper. That's all, propriety.
So this is coming from a...
Nothing else. No civil service rules.
Rebut.
Now we talk about the other things I said.
No, rebut. So I first want to place on...
That's all that I was saying. I was trying to go to the more substantive discussion about whether we should have a constitutional status on the CBI and the CBC, which you've never reached.
Why do you not
feel... You have taken me down this sideways of civil service and messenger and shooting the messenger.
Dr. Singhvi, first of all, I'm no question of misquoting you. I was just putting out what you said in December 2011 Parliament, because I believe it serves a certain context.
Well, you have to allow me to explain. That para is completely quoted out of context. Now give me a minute at least. Let me explain that para. That whole para was in response to an interjection that even constitutional authorities, when they do certain things, have to go to the political executive, which is in turn accountable to Parliament.
that part...
The issue arose that Mr. Salman Khurshid, one second. Mr. Salman Khurshid, at that time the law minister, had suggested that for certain things, the Election Commission required his permission, his ministry's permission. And I was making the point that Mr. Salman Khurshid is accountable to Parliament for where he seeks certain funds and gives certain permissions. Just like the MEA gives permission for outside speeches and travel for certain places like Pakistan. That's all I was saying. Read the whole paragraph. It has nothing to do with an improper comment in a person sitting in a constitutional position.
Sir, I read the paragraph, and I have the pleasure of telling you I saw your entire speech, your brilliant speech.
I'm honored. I'm honored that you did the research.
Which reflected...
You only quoted it inaptly.
Which reflected, in my humble opinion, a little bit of strain at that point of time between the government and other parts, people who were criticizing the government during the debate on the Lokpal. Amitabh Mukhopadhyay raised his hand. I'll go straight across to him. Amitabh Mukhopadhyay on the issue of brazenness. Yes.
You see, Mr. Singhvi, I would like to, since you are a constitutional lawyer and you're such a eminent and learned lawyer, I'd like to pose to you the fact that in our constitution, we opted for a system which was a parliamentary system where there is no separation as exists in the US. There is no separation in India between the legislature and the executive. The CAG plugs in through the legislature. We all as citizens plug in as through the legislature. So all of us are actually duty bound under our constitution, which is very different from the US constitution, to actually influence policy, to actually speak our minds
Precisely.
about what's happening with the kind of policies that are going on, what's happening with gas cylinders, for God's sake. And we need to speak up, and that's the entirety of the Enlightenment, and that's what modernity is really about. So I'd like Mr. Manu Singhvi to try and appreciate the fact that the executive and the legislature are not separate in India. The president and his secretaries in the US are part or are not part of the Congress, but in India the minister is part of the Congress, part of the legislature. So that makes a huge difference to how we relate to policy.
What you have said is largely unexceptionable. It is basic constitutional principle. We all understand the difference between separation of powers versus the British parliamentary system, and there is no cavil, no dispute about 90% of what you said. However, the issue here is slightly different. It has nothing to do with the question as to whether a sitting constitutional authority, and forget for a moment the CAG, take a Supreme Court judge. I remember some time ago, a very good eminent Supreme Court judge at a function at a legal seminar in Mumbai made a remark about politicians in general. The entire journalistic class, all of them, was very critical about a judge of the time of court, off the bench, but a sitting judge nevertheless, making such comments. Why? Because you perceive them in a certain Lakshman Rekha right. Mr. Rai is entitled to have his views.
You see,
he's entitled to propound them privately.
Can I
he's entitled to write about it. The only question is, should he be using the words brazenness and appalling if it is meant as governance? If not, fair enough, no problem. I think 90% of people who read the statement read it as a sweeping indictment of governance and the country.
90% of the government
in the country.
Perhaps 90% of the government.
You are getting into niceties about words used by him like brazenness and appalling.
That's the only question.
What about the impropriety
the first question
of
only that
Prime Minister?
Okay, let's